Today's episode of the show is a question from a follower that I had on Instagram who popped a little question into one of my question boxes and basically asked this question. Is undertraining better than overtraining for beginners? I thought this was an interesting question, so I thought I'd jump on and do a podcast about it and give you my take on this particular question. Now, when it comes to fitness, training, things like that, we often hear discussions about overtraining and that being a bad thing. Overtraining is going to potentially lead you to burnout. It's going to lead you to periods where you can't recover from your training and therefore subsequent workouts are going to be inefficient and ineffective. And ultimately, you're going to compromise your ability to build muscle, to make strength gains, and to get to where you want to be. So overtraining is considered this bad thing. And absolutely, you probably want to avoid it at most costs, at all costs, most of the time, let's say like that. There are periods of time where maybe you want to go into what we would call an overreaching phase, but for the majority of people, sticking below that overtraining phase most of the time is going to be absolutely where you want to be. Now that's especially true if you're a beginner. There's no reason for you to go anywhere near overtraining as a beginner. But it was this question where the concept of undertraining and was that a good thing? Started to spark some interest in my brain. So let's delve into that a little bit more. Now, the simple answer to this question is train the right amount for your goal and for where you are in terms of your skill level. You know, don't overtrain, don't undertrain. Be like Goldilocks, somewhere in the middle. So I wouldn't say it's like better to overtrain or better to undertrain. It's better just to train the right amount. Now that's going to be very, very different for different people. And now I can't see any reason why a beginner would need to overtrain, why that would be something that you would want to do. Now, in terms of overtraining, you are in full control of that. You are in full control of how many times you go to the gym. So if you're going to the gym as a beginner 7 times a week, maybe you're going twice a day, maybe you're training 2 hours a day or whatever, you have complete control of that. You can dial that back. You can stop being such a dick when it comes to your training and trying to go balls out because yes, you've got tons of motivation. Maybe your program is new, you've downloaded it off the internet or you bought it from some guru or you followed an IFBB pro and said, okay, his training program's fucking awesome, let's go do that. And now you're trying to do that in the gym, but you've kind of never been before. You're in full control over those decisions. So there's no reason for you to overtrain. A lot of the time as well, when it comes to overtraining, it's actually under recovery, i.e. there's zero focus on good nutrition, there's zero focus on sleep, on proper recovery, allowing rest days and proper recovery between workouts. That's often where these quote unquote symptoms of overtraining come from. It's this under recovery process. But absolutely, you can ram yourself through to overtraining if you really push the volume and intensity far too high for your current skill level. But as I said before, you have complete control over that. So my initial thing there is when it comes to overtraining and you're a beginner, just don't be a mad fool when it comes to trying to set that training program. Don't follow somebody who is way more experienced and has more actual years under their belt when it comes to training. You don't need to do that program. They're probably doing high volume workouts because they need more stimulus to achieve some progress, achieve some results. Maybe they're a pro, so they have more time as well. It's more practical for them to spend more time in the gym, not that necessarily you need to do that. So when it comes to being a beginner, overtraining is just a nonsense. You don't need to do it. So what about when it comes to undertraining? Now, the term undertraining is probably something that's never been defined very well before. Now, when you're a beginner, to undertrain, you are going to have to basically do fuck all, because when it comes to beginners, it takes very little stimulus for you to build muscle. This is such a new process. Central nervous system is going to start waking up. Strength gains are going to come quite quickly. You're going to build some muscle quite quickly. So therefore, undertraining is literally like sitting on your ass doing fuck all. So if you're actually going to the gym, a couple of times a week, something like that, you're going to see some progress. Maybe if you went 3 times a week, you're going to see a bit more. Maybe if you went 4 times a week, you see a little bit more. But undertraining is, you're really going to have to do fuck all. Like, you're going to have to be one of these guys or girls who goes to the gym maybe like once a week and then your training consists of sitting on a bench and texting. That's under training in my book. So again, you've got control over those things. You've got control over how much you train or don't train. And under training is obviously going to impact your ability to build muscle. If you're not really doing anything in the gym of note and you're not consistent with it, then you are going to be under training. But caveat that with, when you're a beginner, you can kind of just have a vigorous fucking wank and you would probably build some muscle. It really is not that difficult to build muscle. So under training as a beginner, it's going to take some conscious effort to do fuck all, which I think that most people, if you're listening to this or watching this, it's probably not where you're at right now. So I would guess that under training is not really of a concern for you right now. So really the trick is to train the right amount. It sounds obvious, but that's the answer to the question. Train the right amount of time that's appropriate to your skill level and the goal that you're trying to achieve. Probably err on the side of caution when it comes to your training volume. It's probably slightly better to do a little bit less than try to really go balls to the wall from day one, minute one. Dial it back, and if you can, over time, increase that volume and that intensity, then do so as your skill level and your ability to recover allows. Now, train as frequently as recovery allows. So for example, when you're a beginner, might be that you're sore after those first couple of sessions because it is brand new to you. So take time to recover and come back to the gym when you're actually in a place where you can either start to manipulate your training volume so you're not feeling as sore, but at least you can start to have good regular workouts. And again, that's probably a sign that if you're feeling very, very sore at that early stages, maybe volume and intensity is too high. Dial it back. Don't be frightened to start with low intensity, low volume programs and work up as your skill level starts to increase. So when it comes to this whole overtraining versus undertraining sort of scenario, definitely don't overtrain as a beginner, or definitely don't overtrain as any sort of skill level really, unless you're specifically going into an overreaching phase which lasts for a specific amount of time. And that's probably something that, if you're considering that, you already know how to manage your training to achieve that successfully. And if you don't know how to do that, you're probably not at the stage where you need to do it. Other than that, I would say to undertrain as a beginner, you're going to have to do very, very little work. And I hope if you're listening to this, you're watching this, that you're someone who is actively seeking to go to the gym to further their fitness, further their health and things like that. And therefore you're probably motivated enough to not dip into that under training category. But try and make sure you're doing the right appropriate amount of volume for your skill level and what you can actually recover from on a frequent basis. So hopefully this episode of the show helped you get some clarity on overtraining, undertraining, and everything in between. Hopefully it gives you something to think about when it comes to your own training program. And if you've got any questions, maybe you're watching on YouTube and you've got a few questions for me right now, drop them in the comments below. As you do that, like and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on podcast platforms, rating and review would be awesome, but also come and visit me on Instagram at iron_paradise_fitness. Maybe you want to drop me a question, ask me something. Maybe you want to pose a question that could be a future episode of the podcast like this one. Go and do that. And of course, if you want access to free resources, a bunch of information about training, nutrition, evidence-based practice, there's a link in the show notes to ironparadisefitness.com where you can find out more about one-to-one coaching with me as well. But for now, all I'm going to say is thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. Keep living the lean life, and I'll see you for the next episode of the show.